Welcome to the JMJ Commercial Realty Podcast. Dive into market insights, winning strategies, and the stories shaping today's commercial real estate landscape. Let's get started.
Well, welcome everyone to episode 5 of the JMJ Commercial Realty Podcast. I am Adam Schertzer, and I'm joined today by the broker and owner of JMJ Commercial Realty, Josh. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Adam?
Good, good. So I can't believe we're already on to episode 5. If
Yes.
you've been following us, that means there's been 4 episodes before this, and because we know how to count to at least 5. So here we are at episode 5, and past episodes we've kind of talked about who we are, what we do, some of the things around commercial real estate. Now, today we're going to be talking about the benefits and the risks of owning commercial real estate, the goods and the bads, the plus and the minuses. What do we want to start talking about with this today, Josh?
Well, I try and keep it positive in general, so I think we should start with benefits, kind of look at things on the positive side. What do you think, Adam?
I think we start with the good and then talk about some of the risks involved. Not necessarily bad, but just something for people to be aware of when they're, putting a lot of money down on a commercial property. Um, so as far as the benefits go, you know, right off the bat, I know we talked to a lot of people, investors, business owners, maybe some of them are leasing and they're tired of paying someone else, mortgage and they want to get into their own property. So what do we say to them, when they come to us and say, I want to buy commercial property?
Yeah. Well, it depends on their situation, but I think a lot of business owners like the idea of maybe over time, maybe they start by leasing and kind of see how their business goes, but over time they might really want to have more control over owning something. And there are definitely a lot of benefits to owning a piece of property. Sometimes I've seen, just over the years, I've heard stories of where maybe their business doesn't really work out the way that they want, over the longer term, but they're really grateful that they own that piece of property. Sometimes the property is worth a lot more than the business itself, depending on location and size and type and things like that. So, um, I think from a business owner side of things, having a piece of property that they can own can be a great thing.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I know, dealing with something similar now where, they're selling the business and their property, and we found out the property is actually worth a lot more than the business is. Um, and so having that extra piece of, real property, um, can really be great, especially if someone's retiring or changing fields or anything like that. Whereas if you're releasing, your lease just ends and then that's it.
Right. And you could also look at a situation where, say, someone has their business in a property, but then they also have income from other tenants, and maybe that gives them the ability, over time, maybe they can expand into that property. So again,
Hmm.
it's a case by case situation, but it is a nice option for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I was showing a client a property last week that was much bigger than he needs, but likes the possibility of having that rental income and also having something to grow into. I know we see a lot of times we work with businesses in leases or purchasing where they just run out of room. Maybe they think that um, this space will be great for me, and then their business takes off, which is awesome. And then they're running out of room. So um, definitely getting something bigger than smaller than what you need. Um, Unless you're one of those businesses where, things get smaller over time, um, like a miniature company. No, I don't know. I can't think of it. But I think it's stuff like, with COVID where, all these businesses had all this space, especially offices, and so much room. And they were expanding because they were growing. And then all of a sudden we're all working at home. And then they
Mhm.
come back to the office and it's like, okay, we don't need that much space anymore. So, I think like you said, each situation is different. Kind of have to evaluate your own business and kind of see where you think you're going to end up being in 3, 5, 10 years down the road.
Right.
Awesome. So, as far as purchasing a property, ideally, it would appreciate over time. I know we've seen the market, at least in the Massachusetts, Boston area. Most of these properties have gone up, and it's not saying that they will continue to do that. We could see the market go down and you'd lose value, but um, I think a lot of people coming in to purchase property, whether it be commercial or residential, think that over time that, will increase. So, is that the case with what you've seen since you've been doing
Yeah,
it?
I think generally speaking, as time goes on, you tend to see appreciation with commercial properties. Every once in a while, you run into situations where things maybe could be flat, if you're looking to sell, or you could be in a situation where maybe you are at a loss. So it's not a given that it always goes up, but generally, if it's a long-term hold, and let's say you're an investor or you are using it for your business, generally, just kind of like the stock market, over time, real estate tends to go up, but it really depends on different factors in the market.
Hmm.
But that is a nice benefit when you do see it go up.
Yeah, definitely. I imagine location plays a big part in that as well.
Huge.
Um, I've seen some areas around here where there's lots of property available and things aren't selling, and others where, you know, something comes on the market, gets scooped up, almost as fast as it gets put on there.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, things like parking, are really important for certain types of properties, and lot size, building size, location, some of the things that we talked about in earlier episodes.
hmm definitely. Now, what about, so that's appreciation. What about depreciation of a property?
Yeah, so we're talking about, like you said, here in Massachusetts and the United States, but you look at, as you own a piece of property, a building can wear out. Maybe you need to replace a roof or flooring, or um, you know HVAC system, all different types of things. So over time, there are ways, each year, to have, save on your taxes when you own a piece of property by using a depreciation schedule. And I want to go into tax law here, but basically there's a mechanism in place to help depreciate it over time. So that could be beneficial for a property owner as well.
Okay. So if you're releasing it, you couldn't do that for the property that you're leasing.
I don't believe so. I mean, there might be some ways for like equipment or things, for your business itself, but we're
Hmm.
talking more about the property.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I guess some people might look at that as a risk of the property going down, but you can use it to your benefit by helping you save money on taxes.
Yeah. And
Uh,
when it comes time, let's say, if you depreciate a property and then, let's say you hold it for 10 years, 20 years, when you turn around to sell it, um, your basis, your cost basis might be, much lower. So you might have a higher um, tax amount that you're paying. But there are ways, like for example, there's a 1031 exchange, and so sometimes people will sell a property and roll that into a new property, and you're deferring. You're not avoiding taxes, but you're deferring taxes. And so there are different strategies for investment property, which is nice.
so I know that I've heard that 1031 exchange term come up a lot, and I'm sure we could have a whole episode just on 1031 exchanges. Um, but let's just give a little more detail how that works, or how, does it have to be the same property or the same like size property, same dollar amount, like if you're, selling one to buy another.
Yeah, so typically it's what's called like kind. So if you had an office building, you don't have to purchase, another office building, but like kind being investment property, so you could go from an office building to a retail plaza, or you could go to a multi-unit apartment building, or some other type of real estate that's investment related. It doesn't have to be, if you're here in like we're in Massachusetts, it doesn't have to be located in Massachusetts. It could be another state. So 1031 has a lot of flexibility, but you definitely have to follow the rules. If you're not doing a qualified type of transaction, then it could become taxable. And so I think maybe in a future podcast or YouTube episode here. Like maybe we'll have, someone that's on from the 1031 side to talk about how you identify a property, the timelines involved, all that kind of stuff. But 1031 is a nice mechanism in place
So
to,
if we had a client that came to us that wanted to do that, do we have people that we can work with? Are there like 1031 specialists
yes,
that just do that? Okay,
absolutely. Yeah.
that's good. So they know all the rules and everything that needs to be followed to do that. We can't be
Yeah.
like, all right, someone owns a McDonald's, be like, all right, I'm going to trade this in for a Burger King. Be like, all right, sounds good. You know,
Well, I mean, if you had a triple net McDonald's property and you
yeah,
saw a triple net Burger King or some other type of thing, you could.
right.
It depends. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I imagine you have to do that, you know, right now we're talking in, there's only a couple months left, 2.5 months left in the year, that we're recording this right now. If that's something someone wanted to do, you'd have to do it within, you know, the same calendar year, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, there's some very specific things.
Okay.
So I'll kind of let's save that for a future episode.
All right. Make sure you tune in for episode 37, 1031 exchanges. Yeah. That's good. And I think we got one more thing to talk about benefits here. Diversification. You talk a little
Yeah,
bit
so
about,
when you think about like the stock market, right? Sometimes people will have mutual funds or individual stocks. Seen years in the past where the stock market can drop quite a bit or can go up quite a bit. So, um, you have the ups and downs for that type of an investment, but having real estate, having other, bonds, cash, other types of things to really kind of diversify. Real estate can be a nice way to have something that's tangible. You can see the property. You can also, you look at for commercial, the length of a lease. We talked about, these triple net um, leases where sometimes someone could be, in a property for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, especially we're talking about a company long term, maybe a national tenant. That's very different than a residential property where maybe it's a 1 year lease and then it kind of gets renewed 1 year at a time. So you can kind of diversify from a time perspective as well.
hmm yeah, I know having that thing you can actually see, compared to just going online and checking your balance, in your 401k or your, IRA or retirement accounts or things like that. And yeah, it's nice to have that diversification, and anything because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and you can also like look at what kind of income is coming in for the property? Are there ways that you can improve the property? It's called value add. Are there ways that you can make some changes, maybe from if things can get changed from a zoning side of things, maybe you can allow a different type of use, or you can do something extra on a lot. Like, can you build another property there? Um, can you look at ways that maybe you can reduce expenses? Maybe you're paying a lot for one provider, and if you change to a different provider, that really improves the returns. There are things that you can do, whether it's increasing income, decreasing expenses, looking at properties in different ways. So commercial is kind of there's different things that you can do as an owner to help improve the returns.
Yeah, definitely. I know, another benefit too, and we really touched on this too, is triple net leases, where you can own this property and then you have the tenant pretty much pay all of the costs, involved with the property. So, it's a lot more hands off with someone who's looking to, have an investment. I know I think you were dealing with some people recently looking for triple net investments where, they pretty much they purchase it, they own it. Um, but it's a lot more hands off, I would think, than, you know, if you had to do all the maintenance and do all that stuff yourself, maybe similar to like if you owned a residential property and you hired a company to manage it for a management company. Is that kind of a similar comparison? Like if someone's listening now that maybe they own some apartments and they have a management company take care of that for them.
Right. Yeah, there's different ways. I mean, we talked in a previous episode about commercial condos. And so and sometimes, people like that there's a condo association and kind of have a property manager, or have a property manager just, that takes care of their own buildings. But, that's an expense. But if it frees up the person's time to do other types of things, they might really like that benefit, that as a benefit.
Hmm.
Um, and if you can have a tenant that's there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, makes it easier than having to constantly, find a new tenant.
Yeah, that length of leasing terms is great. I think it's beneficial for the owner and beneficial for the tenant too to know that they have a place of business for a certain amount of time there.
Right. And a lot of times in their leases, they'll have it spelled out as to here's what my rental rate is going to be generally. So that gives them some peace of
Hmm.
mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you can secure something for down the line, I think we mentioned maybe in the previous podcast that Guinness lease, where they
The
give you
9,000 years or something like that.
9,000 years for, I don't know, 45 pounds or whatever it was. You know? And so to know that, but even with, leases that we more deal with, something that's maybe 3, 5, 10 years, for a business to be able to plan that, okay, in year 5, year 7, I know that I'm going to be paying this much, for rent. Um, I think it's a great added benefit, to a business who's leasing. And then also for an owner, the property, knowing that, okay, I know that for the next 10 years, I'm going to be getting X amount of dollars in, over the course of that lease. So then, you have that security of knowing your property is continuously, providing you income, like you said, without having to worry about, okay, they're here for a year. All right, 9 months down the line, I got to start looking for someone else again, or, they're going to be leaving.
Yeah, and one of the risks of owning a piece of property is depending on the situation, commercial can take a long time to find a tenant.
Hmm.
I mean, it might be, something that's super desirable and you get multiple offers right away for a new tenant, but we've seen situations where sometimes it can be years that trying to find a tenant. So that can be a tough situation if you're still responsible for taxes every year as the owner, for insurance costs, for maintenance, and you don't have any income coming in. So you could go from a cash flow situation where you're making money every month to a negative, you're losing money every month. So that's definitely can be a risk. On the plus side, you mentioned the longer, with the longer leases, if you wanted at some point to sell the property, that can be really advantageous as a seller because, a new buyer might look at it and say, this is great. I have an income stream. I have, 8 years left on this lease and 10 years left on this lease and great tenants that are there. That might really help to command more of a premium for when you're looking to sell the property.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a good transition for us to go from the benefits there to the risks. So why don't we talk about some of those now? Um, I think one of the risks is, when you're going to purchase a property, whether it's for yourself or an investment, you're usually putting down a big chunk of change there. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, commercial properties tend to be quite expensive. It's not always the case, but often they are quite expensive. So, you may be in a situation where you need to put down 10%, 20%, 25, 30%, depending on, if you're a business owner or you're an investor. Sometimes a bank will want to see a lot more skin in the game if you're, you know, using it as an investment vehicle.
Hmm.
And that could be quite a bit. It could be millions of dollars down. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars down, depending on the properties.
Yeah. So if you're, a newer business or, even a business in first couple of years, you might not be in a situation where you can purchase something. Like this might not even be an option, to have that much money. So, you know, you see a lot of these businesses where most likely would start off with leasing and then ideally be able to build up that capital over time that, as you're growing, then you get in a better position where you could, potentially purchase something. But
Right.
also, like you said, as an investment, maybe someone has, you know, millions of dollars sitting in their retirements accounts or something like that, and they want to diversify and they want to say, okay, I'm making 6, 7% in here, maybe I can make 10%, with a property and then have something appreciate over time. And but of course, there's always that risk too that might buy that property and then you can't find a tenant or the tenant leaves and then you're still paying for this
Mhm.
where, as you know, when you have, a security or something with a investment with 401ks and mutual funds that you have that set, amount that ideally it will stay there. Or if you, really want to be secure, you just put it in a bank and get your, 1% or something like that. But
Yeah, but the challenge though sometimes for an investor is if you only make 1% or 2% or whatever you're getting for a money market or for interest, the risk is inflation. And
mhm,
as things get more and more expensive over time, that money is not really worth as much. So what's nice about a commercial property is that a lot of times there are increases in what the tenant pays, and that's built into these leases. So a tenant might pay, X amount of dollars per month year one, but by year two or year three, year four, it's going to be a different amount, usually a higher amount.
yeah, I mean, it seems like usually we see, like a 3%, 3% increase per year. And I assume that, that's kind of to compensate for inflation. If inflation goes up 3% a year, or
Yeah, and
also,
sometimes sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say
yeah,
sometimes you look at the costs that the owner might have. Maybe it's not a triple net lease and the owner is responsible for certain things. It might be that the taxes go up on the property. It might be that the insurance costs go up on the property.
hmm
So it's less of a benefit for the owner as they're paying more for some of these costs. So by having the rental rate increase, that helps to offset that,
yeah,
generally speaking.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, in the time that you've done that, I know the time I've done this, I haven't seen rates go down. I mean, I think we're in a strong, you know, economy now for these type of properties that we deal with, where most of these prices continue to go up. Um, I'm not going to say pull out your crystal ball, but I mean, could you foresee a time where, you know, someone was getting, a certain amount for a property, then all of a sudden, they try to get a new tenant and they can't get that same amount anymore because the market has changed or the
Oh
economy's
yeah.
changed and
Yeah, I mean, if you run into a situation where there's a glut of, say, office space, you look at COVID, right? And if there's a lot of extra office space that's out there, maybe you were getting a fantastic rate and long-term tenant, but then the tenant, something happened to that tenant, or the tenant just said, "I want out," and um, maybe they stopped paying, or maybe the business shut down, maybe and then it's harder to find a new tenant, or maybe the interest rates changed dramatically, and you were getting financing from a bank, and maybe the numbers made sense at a certain arrangement, but the new rates don't make sense anymore. So there's definitely risks from that perspective.
hmm yeah, and I think we're still, sort of seeing that, what, 5, 6 years now almost since COVID happened, that there still is quite a bit of office space available. And I think people can get, you know, some better deals than they probably could have, 8, 9 years ago. They were
Right.
looking for office space. So yeah, that's a great example, something like
Yeah,
that.
and from an owner side of things, let's say you make a concession, and your building. Let's say you have an office building, and um, you know it's a general kind of price per square foot that you're trying to keep for your office building. If you all of a sudden put a new tenant in at a much lower rate, and then the other tenants say, "Wait, I was paying, for example, $20 a square foot. Why is this new tenant paying $10 a square foot?" You may start to have some of your existing tenants
Mm,
ask for you to lower your rates. So it can be challenging sometimes as an operator.
yeah. Is it that information is not public, right? I know if someone was to purchase, a commercial property, a building, anyone can go on and look at the assessor's records and see that. But as far as leases go, there's nowhere where I think even for us sometimes, where someone, unless it's posted in like MLS, sometimes on a listing, you might see what a place was asking and then what they're getting.
Yeah. Sometimes agents will share that information, or sometimes owners will share and say, "Here's kind of my rent roll. Here's, what I'm receiving from each of the tenants."
Mhm.
Sometimes they're a little more guarded about that, and they'll say, "I'll share it with you, but you need to sign a non-disclosure. I don't want other people to use that information."
hmm
Depends, but it is harder to find out that information, generally speaking.
Yeah.
terms of the lease. What kind of a lease is it? What rates are they paying? Sometimes we get, I don't know if you're getting this recently, but get a lot of calls from appraisers. They're trying to determine values for a transaction. Maybe a bank hires an appraiser. And the appraiser's asking me as a broker, as an agent, hey, I saw you did a transaction. Can you tell me about the lease? Can you tell me about, what was the
Hmm.
situation here? So they're trying to help to determine the value.
Right. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, let's see. Are there any other risks that you can think of for purchasing commercial property? I think we've covered a lot of them here. We did talk about you still have to cover all your expenses, even if you have no tenants there, which can be tough. I know there's definitely the plus and minus of buying a property that has tenants, where the cost of buying that property is probably going to be at a premium. But if you purchased a property that had no tenants and you could think, oh, I'm going to go in there and get it, maybe you can, get a deal on that property. But then you're stuck with covering all those costs until you do get people in there, which, like you said before, could be months to even years before it's completely full.
Right. Yeah, it's I mean, the environment that we're in now, certainly things can change and real estate can be is cyclical, but you may have a great long-term tenant in place and it's corporate backed, but you might be in an environment where maybe the corporation shuts down, maybe that national tenant or that great tenant that you have, you thought it was going to be a long-term situation and then things change. So there are risks, and do you have enough of a reserve to kind of weather some of these situations? I mean, we just recently came across a client who had a tenant and, great national tenant. People would know who it is. They gave notice. They were there for 30 years in one location, and they gave, I think it was 2 days notice or 3 days notice, and they just shut that location down. So things like that can happen, even if you have a great location and a great tenant in place. So
Hmm.
definitely there could be some
Yeah, I
risks.
mean, we're seeing a lot of businesses, large national companies cut back. I mean, I think recently, I don't know if I can name them, a popular coffee shop, closed a bunch of stores worldwide, just realizing that maybe some of these companies expanded too quickly and then now they're cutting back. And so you end up with these, what you thought was a great national tenant. Now you get an empty space you got to fill. So definitely going to be careful with some of the risks there. But I think I think that's about covers it for what we're decided to cover today on the benefits and risks. So I appreciate you taking the time to go over that with all of our listeners and all of our viewers. And as always, if you do have any questions, definitely comment on here. We do get back to everyone. Or you can reach us at podcast@jmj-cre.com. And we'll be happy to answer your question, maybe talk about the question you have in a future episode. And speaking of future episodes, next week we have episode 6, which we're going to be talking about the benefits and risks of working as a commercial real estate agent. So going from benefits and risks to owning property, now to the benefits and risks of working as a commercial real estate agent. And I think we have plenty of experience that we can share on that subject.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Take care, everyone.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the JMJ Commercial Realty podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of JMJ Commercial Realty or its affiliates. The information provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or real estate advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals regarding their specific real estate or business needs. JMJ Commercial Realty makes no representations or warranties as to the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of any information discussed. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is done solely at your own risk. By listening, you agree that JMJ Commercial Realty and its representatives shall not be held liable for any losses or damages resulting from the use of information shared.